The first time he saw her, the world seemed to bow, not to him, the prince, but to her eyes. They weren't the kind of eyes that sought attention or demanded admiration, they simply existed, powerful in their quietness, honest in their light. In that moment, even the weight of his golden crown felt meaningless. He had spent his whole life surrounded by luxury, by beauty sculpted to perfection, yet nothing in all the riches of the palace compared to the truth he found in her gaze. It was as though the heavens had sent him a mirror, not to show his reflection, but to remind him of his soul. Her eyes told stories that no poet could write, not even him. They carried storms and peace, sunrise and sorrow, all in one glance. When she looked at him, he felt stripped of titles, of expectations, of history. She didn't see a ruler or a royal, she saw a man learning to love, unsure yet sincere. In a world that adored his power, she adored his silence. And it was then he realized, love doesn't always come with fireworks or music. Sometimes, it walks in softly, through a pair of eyes that see you before the world ever does. She became his secret universe, the one place untouched by duty. When she spoke, her words were soft, but her eyes carried courage. They reminded him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was truth. He found himself writing poems again, not for the public, but for her. Every verse he wrote was born from her glance, from the way her eyes held the kind of faith that no kingdom could buy. To her, he wasn't a symbol of power. He was just a man with a heart that forgot how to rest. There were days when the crown felt heavier than ever, when the expectations of the world pressed against his chest like stone. But then he would remember her gaze, steady, fearless, forgiving. It had the power to silence the noise, to make him believe that love could exist beyond duty. Her eyes didn't just outshine his crown, they dethroned his pride. They made him realize that power means nothing when the heart is empty, and that true royalty is not worn, it is felt. Every meeting with her was a prayer disguised as coincidence. In her presence, time slowed, words softened, and even the air seemed to listen. Her eyes had a gravity that pulled him toward truth, a quiet command that asked him to be real, not royal. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be seen, not admired, not analyzed, but truly seen. She became the compass of his heart, guiding him away from the noise of applause toward the peace of sincerity. He often wondered what kind of soul could carry such light. How could someone so gentle hold so much power? When she laughed, the room brightened, but when she looked into his eyes, the whole world disappeared. There were moments he wanted to tell her how she had undone him completely, but words would have been too small for a truth that vast. So instead, he loved her silently, in glances, in poems, in the pauses between duty and desire. The poets in his lineage wrote of beauty, of desert moons and royal sunsets, but none had written about her, the kind of beauty that humbles kings. Her eyes had taught him that love was not possession, but presence. He didn't want to own her, he wanted to deserve her. And so, he became gentler, quieter, more human. The people began to notice a change in him, the way he smiled differently, the way his poems sounded like confessions. They thought it was maturity. It was her. Sometimes he'd stand before the mirror, the crown glinting under the palace light, and he'd whisper to himself, "Even this gold means nothing beside her gaze." He wasn't being poetic, he was being honest. For every jewel that adorned his throne, there was still something missing, the reflection of her eyes, the one thing he could never command. He could move nations with a word, but he couldn't stop his heart from trembling when she looked at him. That was her power, quiet, invisible, eternal. They could never walk hand in hand beneath the open sky. The world wouldn't understand. But she never needed grand gestures, her eyes were enough. When she looked at him, it felt like forgiveness for every part of him that duty had hardened. In that gaze, he was not a prince. He was a man, fragile, flawed, but real. And she loved that version of him.
Years passed, yet he could never forget the way her eyes looked at him that last evening, calm, knowing, filled with both love and farewell. It was as if she had already accepted what he could not, that some loves are meant to stay unfinished, like verses left open for eternity. When she turned away, the world dimmed. Even the palace lights seemed weaker, as though the stars themselves bowed in mourning. From that day on, every time he put on the crown, it felt heavier, colder, a reminder that it could command respect, but never love. In the quiet of his chambers, he often replayed their memories like sacred rituals. The way her laughter softened his storms, the way her eyes taught him to listen instead of speak. He could almost hear her voice whispering through the silence, telling him to live, to lead, to write, but never to forget. Her eyes still followed him in dreams, not hauntingly, but as a guide, reminding him that he once knew what real love felt like. They were his compass long after she was gone, leading him back to himself whenever the world demanded too much of him. Sometimes, in moments of deep solitude, he would visit the desert. The sands seemed endless, but the wind still carried traces of her scent, her laughter, her peace. There, with no crown, no titles, no expectations, he spoke to her freely. He would tell her how the world was, how he had changed, how every poem he wrote still began with her shadow. He believed the desert listened, that it carried his words to wherever her spirit rested. In that boundless silence, he felt her near, as if her eyes had become stars, still watching him, still loving him. The world continued to celebrate him, his leadership, his kindness, his poetry. But none of them knew the price behind the grace. They applauded the man, but they never met the heart that still ached quietly beneath the robe. He smiled, he reigned, he created, but behind every triumph was a soft remembrance of the woman whose eyes had once made him forget he was a prince. They saw his crown, only he knew it had lost its light. For how can gold shine when love has already taken its glow? And yet, he was grateful. Grateful that he had known her, that he had loved something so rare that it could outlast presence. Her eyes had not only